This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. If you click on the link in the description below, it'll take you to their store and they'll know I sent you there. Hello everyone, I'm NEZAHAL, and it's Wednesday, so that means it's time for another MTG Top 10. This time around I'm looking at blink and or flicker effects. Sometimes you hear these terms used interchangeably, other times you hear a distinction drawn between them. Either way, both of them temporarily exile a permanent, either returning the permanent immediately or at the end of the turn. You will find people who will use blink for one and flicker for the other, but even Wizards is not consistent with what flicker means. I mean, look at flicker and flicker wisp. They have two different effects. Wizards actually uses flicker and insta-flicker to differentiate between the two effects, but as players, that isn't terminology we've actually picked up. So for me, the two terms are pretty interchangeable. The two effects, as I said, are similar, whatever you want to call them, so drawing a distinction between them and making two different top 10s would have been a bit excessive. No matter how you define these things, these type of effects are highly flexible. You can use them to abuse Enter the Battlefield abilities on other creatures, they can protect your creatures from removal, and so on. Some cards can do it to the opponent's permanents too, opening up even more options. As we'll see, flickering or blinking permanents has been used in several combo decks too. So, to be eligible to appear on this list, a card had to exile a permanent and then have it return at some point later in the same turn. This includes permanents that can blink and flicker themselves. Cards that exile stuff for longer than that were not considered for this list. Alright, before we get started, a quick reminder on how I score cards in these videos. Pro Tour and Mythic Championship top 8s, as well as Legacy and Vintage Championship top 8s are worth 2 points, and a Grand Prix top 8 is worth 1 point. Alright, let's go to number 10. At number 10, I have Mystifying Maze, which can flicker an attacking creature an opponent controls. This is one of the few versions of this effect that doesn't at least have the option of targeting your own stuff, with the Maze's main function being to gain time for slower decks as they try to find a way to stabilize. It picked up all 4 of its points at Worlds in 2012, where it was played as a singleton copy in both Eldrazi Green and Blue-Black Control. It was probably at its best in Eldrazi Green because it had ways to search up that one copy of the card, getting it out of the toolbox when it was really needed. The Maze hasn't put up any points at all since Worlds in 2012, and its days on this list are likely numbered, as there are cards right behind it that are in Standard right now, like Charming Prince. At number 9, it is VENSER, the Sojourner, a planeswalker who can flicker stuff, namely permanents you control. So while the Maze could only go after the opponent's stuff, VENSER can only do it with yours. It doesn't hurt that he has 2 other pretty nice abilities too, making your whole board unblockable or making every single spell you play exile a permanent. On a basic level, VENSER's +1 can be used to untap one of your creatures who attacked, since when it comes back into play, it comes back untapped. Provided you have some sort of board state, this can help to protect VENSER. While in Standard, VENSER picked up points primarily in Planeswalker-heavy control decks, where the exile effect could be used to reset another Planeswalker's loyalty, and it also lets you use another loyalty ability from that Planeswalker, even if you already used one during the same turn. Like Mystifying Maze, VENSER doesn't have any points since 2012, so its future on this list may be in danger. At number 8, I have Momentary Blink, a flashback spell that can flicker, or if you prefer, blink your creatures. It gained all of its points in standard Revelark decks. These decks were loaded up with creatures with Enter the Battlefield abilities which Revelark could bring back from the graveyard, and Momentary Blink gave you another way to get multiple triggers out of those creatures. Additionally, because Revelark's trigger happens when it leaves play, blinking it meant that you would get to reanimate a creature too. The deck was also interested in loading the graveyard some, so Momentary Blink having flashback was a pretty nice thing to have. Momentary Blink is another card that has never found success outside of Standard. At number 7, I have Astral Slide, a cycling build-around that can flicker both your creatures and your opponents. Astral Slide was powerful enough that entire decks were built around it in both Block and Standard. You could use the slide to temporarily exile problem creatures that your opponent controlled, buying you more time, and you could use it to exile your own creatures with Enter the Battlefield abilities, grinding out a ton of value. Cycling a card is pretty low cost since you are causing the card to just replace itself, so adding a powerful effect like this to every card you cycle is an amazing deal. In block versions of the deck, you could use Astral Slide on your face-down morph creatures to get a discounted face-up Exalted Angel. In Standard, it was more frequently used alongside cards like Eternal Witness and Viridian Shaman to get multiple uses out of those powerful Enter the Battlefield abilities. And number 6, it's Felidar Guardian, who can flicker your permanents. This guy might seem sort of unassuming, but the Guardian does a good job of illustrating how blink or flicker effects can be used to create super busted combos. And this is a combo that Wizards famously missed during their own playtesting, despite the fact that the two cards are from the same block. If you combine the Guardian with Saheeli Rai, you could use Saheeli Rai's -2 loyalty ability to make a copy of the Guardian. Then the copy of the Guardian would use its Enter the Battlefield trigger to blink Saheeli Rai, who would then come back with her starting loyalty, and she could use her -2 ability again. You rinse and repeat from there until you have enough copies of Felidar Guardian with haste that you can just attack your opponent with all of them and kill them. This was a fairly easy to assemble turn 4 combo in Standard, and it quickly proved to be way too good of a combo for that format. After a brief 2.5 months of dominance, where the Guardian managed 13 points in the so-called copycat deck, Felidar Guardian got banned in April of 2017. With the creation of Pioneer in late 2019, it looked like it might be possible for the Guardian to get some more points, but it got banned there too, so it looks like the Guardian is going to be stuck at 13 points for the foreseeable future. At number 5, it's NEZAHAL, Primal Tide, a creature who can flicker itself. NEZAHAL has all the traits you want for a control deck win condition, especially against other control decks. He's huge, he can generate card advantage, he's uncounterable, and he can protect himself with that flicker effect. Discarding 3 cards can kind of be a steep cost, but the fact that NEZAHAL draws you cards every time your opponents play a non-creature spell helps to soften that blow. NEZAHAL was primarily a sideboard card while in Standard, one which could be brought in by control decks against the mirror. Being uncounterable and difficult to kill is bad news for control decks. At number 4, it's ELDRAZI Displacer. The Displacer can exile any creatures it wants to, and when it does, they return to the battlefield tapped. This means that you can not only use the Displacer to do sweet stuff with your creatures, you can effectively use it to tap down your opponent's creatures too. That's pretty powerful in a creature with solid stats. In all formats it has points in, and has been played alongside fellow Eldrazi Thought-Knots here, whose Into the Battlefield ability can be abused with the Displacer. In Standard it was also played alongside Brood Monitor, which would allow you to sacrifice infinite tokens. Since you could sacrifice the Eldrazi tokens to pay for the ability of the Displacer, flicker the Monitor, get 3 more tokens, and so on. This actually doesn't do anything on its own, but if you throw Zulaport Cutthroat into the mix, you have an instant win combo. In Modern, it was also played alongside Thought-Knots here in Eldrazi decks that dominated the so-called Eldrazi Winter, before the deck ended up being banned out of existence. The deck was so strong that it was largely ported to Vintage, where Eldrazi Displacer has found some success. While the Displacer has points in multiple formats, it has 0 since 2017. However, we can't really ever count it out. It has too good of a track record for us to do that. At number 3, it's Flickerwisp, an efficient flyer who can temporarily exile any permanent. You can even use it to exile an opponent's untapped land, so that if they want to use it for something during your turn in a later phase, they just won't have access to the mana. Flickerwisp gives you some nice value for 3 mana, since it can attack pretty effectively in the sky, while bringing you all kinds of value. So far, the cards we've looked at haven't had a life outside of Standard, mostly, but Flickerwisp is kind of the opposite. It wasn't played in Standard at all, but it has caught on in non-rotating formats. In both Modern and Legacy, it has primarily been featured in Hate Bear decks, where it is used to get additional triggers out of creatures with powerful Enter the Battlefield abilities. It can also be put into play at instant speed with Aether Vial, at which point you can use it to protect creatures from removal, and instant speed Flickerwisp also means that you can put it into play and exile something of your opponents at the end of their turn, and it will still be gone until your instep. Flickerwisp is the glue that holds Death and Taxes decks together in Legacy these days, and it's continuing to amass points in them, and it could have a shot at overtaking the number 2 card on this list in the future. At number 2, I have Aetherling. Aetherling comes with a slew of activated abilities, and arguably the most important one is the ability to dodge removal by exiling itself until the next instep. Being unblockable and capable of raising power and toughness at will means that Aetherling represents a quick, difficult-to-kill clock. The combination of evasiveness and elusiveness made Aetherling one of the primary win conditions for control decks while it was in block and Standard, and that's where it's managed to get all of its points. It has a chance to put up some more points in Pioneer going forward, but Flickerwisp right now is hot on the trail of Aetherling, and in the next year it wouldn't be that shocking to see Flickerwisp pass the number 2 card on this list. And at number 1, it's Restoration Angel, and it isn't even particularly close. She not only brings efficient stats that can allow her to eat an attacking creature when you flash her into play, but what's important for our list is that she flickers a creature when she comes into play. This gives her immense flexibility, and Flash allows her to do this in response to a removal spell, allowing your creatures to survive. She can also be used to abuse a creature's enter the battlefield or leave the battlefield ability. One of the nastiest things you could do was blink a Thragtusk with her, since you would get both the leaves the battlefield and enter the battlefield trigger every time you did it. She can also work as a combo piece, as if you combine her with something like Kiki Jiki, she allows you to blink Kiki over and over, allowing you to make infinite copies of her. She just does a whole lot for 4 mana, and her flicker effect is really central to what makes her so good. She saw a bunch of play in Block and Standard, and still sees a lot of play in Modern, and that's going to keep being the case. Well, that does it for this MTG Top 10. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch future MTG Top 10s, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to see the over 240 other MTG Top 10s I've already done, you should see the playlist on your screen now. Thanks for watching.